So welcome, one and all, including all parts of you, to this fireside conversation where we'll be exploring somatic parts work in coaching and facilitating. Part of me is super excited about today's session. Part of me hopes that you'll get tons of value from it. Part of me wants to hide and not be in the spotlight. Part of me wonders if I have dissociative identity disorder. And part of me doesn't agree with that other pathologizing part. Part of me thinks it's time to move on. And then there's this other presence that's not quite a part, but more of a pervasive awareness in which I experience these parts. It's not only the sum of all parts in me, but also the experience of self that's not limited or bound in any way. This experience of self is both personal and transpersonal, existing beyond me and connecting me to all of you and everyone else and everything in nature. I think of this experience as the authentic self. Richard Schwartz, developer of internal family systems, describes the characteristics of self with a capital S using 8 C words: calmness, curiosity, clarity, compassion, confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness. So let's gather around the campfire of our interconnected, authentic selves today. Feel this fire warming your face and your heart, and sense the presence of all others who are gathered here with us today. I've invited Jules De Vitto, who is very familiar with this territory, to be our conversation partner today. I'll start by introducing Jules. Then she will lead us into a mini meditation to open space for our exploration. Then I'll ask Jules some questions to get our conversation started. And then there'll be time for questions from any of you. So Jules De Vitto has a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, an MA in Education, and an MSc in Transpersonal Psychology, Consciousness and Spirituality. She is an accredited transpersonal coach and authentic self-empowerment ASE facilitator who specializes in working with highly sensitive people. Jules is currently working at a mindfulness-based center in Portugal and primarily focuses on the exploration of parts when working with clients. She also emphasizes the importance of connecting with parts in an embodied and soma-centered way, and has drawn on various approaches that emphasize parts work, particularly those that align and stem from a transpersonal approach to coaching. So Jules, thanks for being here with us today. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Jevon, for that wonderful introduction. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And welcome, everyone. It's nice to see lots of familiar faces as well. So we're going to start with a short mindfulness practice. So perhaps just adjusting your posture, making yourself comfortable in your chair or wherever you're sat today. And if possible, just having your feet on the ground or touching a surface. And you can have your eyes open or closed for this practice, whatever's more comfortable for you. And we'll just begin by taking 3 deep breaths. So breathing in through the nose, breathing deeply into the belly or navel area, and then exhaling deeply through the mouth. And as you breathe in and out, allowing the exhale to be slightly longer than the inhale. And with each breath, coming into a deeper connection with the physical body. And then allowing your breath to return to a normal pace. So not trying to control it in any way. And then taking a moment to notice the connection of your feet against the earth, or the connection of your body against the chair. And perhaps leaning back ever so slightly or softening that connection to the support that's below you. And as we continue to breathe in and out, gently scanning your body all the way from the soles of your feet, moving gently and slowly up to the crown of your head. And as you scan your body, gently recognizing, noticing what's present, what's calling for your attention. Perhaps there are areas of tightness or tension. And so being open and curious as to what parts may be at the forefront in the physical body right now. And so simply allowing whatever is present and here to simply be here. And as we continue with the gentle in and out breath, now becoming aware of the areas in and around the body where there is spaciousness. And allowing the breath to enter into these areas of spaciousness. And noticing how with each in and out breath, that space expands within and around the body. And so now bringing your awareness to the space that's in front of the body. The space that's behind you. And the space that's to the left-hand side. The space that's to the right-hand side. The space that's above you. and also below you. And so as we allow our awareness to enter into this entire space within and around the body, just noticing how far, how wide this space can expand. And at the same time, staying open and curious to the sensations, the parts that are calling your attention within and around the body. Seeing how much you can simply be aware and allow this space to hold all parts that are present in the here and now. And so now, as we maintain this open awareness and this connection to the body, the physical body, we'll take a deep in and out breath, just like we did at the beginning. And perhaps wiggling your toes, your fingertips. You might feel like stretching or doing something just to come back into the space, adjusting your posture. And if your eyes are being closed, perhaps opening them again, just welcoming everyone and everyone's parts into the space today. And so I definitely noticed during that practice that I have lots of different parts present right now. I have a part that's feeling really excited about this conversation. I have a part that's feeling nervous about speaking in this space. And also a part after that practice that's feeling more grounded and calm and having this capacity to be present. And perhaps I'd be interested actually if you want to just type a few words in the chat box. If you noticed any parts present for you during that practice, or if you noticed any shift from the beginning and then towards the end of that practice. And then I will hand over to Jevon, who's going to start the conversation for us today.
Thank you, Jules. I really enjoyed your session and really needed that. We were experiencing a technical glitch that seemed unresolvable just ahead of the start time today. And I could still feel that very active in my body as the session started. And your guided meditation has very rapidly brought me into a beautiful state of presence that I'm enjoying. And the voices of that part and other parts, they're there, but they're not disruptive. They're not disturbing my state. So I'm enjoying that. Thank you. And while others share in the chat window their experience of that, I'm wondering if we can get started. And if you could speak to the question, what is parts work and what modalities use parts work? What are parts?
Good question, and a big question. So I'm sure many of us are familiar with the concept of parts. And again, perhaps if you want to just type in the chat box if this is, or you can, I know we have these this ability on Zoom to put our thumb up or a heart symbol. If you are familiar with parts work, perhaps let us know. But it's really become popular in recent years because of the work of internal family systems. Richard Schwartz, who talks about internal family systems. Gabor Mate talks about compassionate inquiry. He works with parts. And then Psychosynthesis talks about parts and subpersonalities. But of course, in our work as ASE facilitators or in transpersonal coaching, we also work with parts. And I think something that is quite powerful about the work we do relates to the practice we just did. So, as you know, one of our main modalities is using open awareness. And when we're in a state of open awareness and we help our clients to be in that state of open awareness as well, we're really connecting to this concept of self or the authentic self. And for myself, the self is what exists beyond and behind the ego. And so when we're working with parts, we're working with contents of the ego. And when someone is triggered by something, it is parts within the ego that are activated. And so when we're in a state of open awareness and we're more connected to our self energy, we have more space and capacity to work with parts. And so parts are really, I would define them as these constellated patterns of behavior, beliefs, feelings, and needs. And as I mentioned earlier, we can also understand them as subpersonalities. So often parts exist in the subconscious, they exist in the shadow. So often we have parts that we have disowned or denied or suppressed, perhaps because we haven't, or society doesn't see those parts as socially acceptable. I work with highly sensitive people, and this comes up a lot with sensitive people, this idea that our sensitivity isn't always appreciated or acknowledged in society. So a lot of people have a sensitive part which is suppressed or denied. We can also have angry parts or parts that carry anger, and we might deny those parts too. So as coaches and facilitators, we're helping our clients in a state of open awareness to develop a compassionate and healthy relationship with these parts. So again, often I find lots of people want to push these parts away or deny them or suppress them. But really our work is about integrating these parts into the psyche and knowing that even if the parts might be sabotaging us in some way, parts always have a positive intention or purpose. There's a reason the parts are there. So we're trying to elicit what that purpose or reason might be, and then help the client to integrate the part into themselves. And then, of course, we're working in a very somatic and embodied way as well. So with the practice I just did, I was asking you to connect with the felt sense in the body. So when there is tension or tightness in the body, that's often a part that's showing up. So let's say experiencing anxiety. If a client has lots of anxiety, you can help them to locate that anxiety in the body as a felt sense. There's a lot more I could keep saying, but Jevon, I'm wondering if you have anything to add to that, or if there's another question.
Thanks, Jules. As you speak, I'm reminded of so many cases, clients that have come for coaching, And what has become apparent to me over the years, which I think you're confirming here, is that whatever is raised as the presenting issue that the client brings to seek help for in coaching, it's always the issue of a particular part. There's always a part underpinning that issue, or the issue is associated with unmet needs of a particular part.
Mm.
And it seems as if it's not always a problem for the part, but that it has become triggered. I'm interested in identifying what has triggered the part into the unresourceful state, which becomes the presenting problem. And remain intensely curious at the outset of a coaching session to identify what the trigger is and what is the part that has been triggered, which is, of course, a fundamental aspect of our transpersonal coaching model. But if it's true that there's always a part that's being triggered, and if there is some validity to the existence of parts, always in any coaching or therapy session for that matter, then what brings these parts into existence? Where do parts come from? What are their origins?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you can speak to that, Jules.
Yeah, so from my experience, these parts that exist are often stuck in limiting beliefs from the past. So as I mentioned, there are these constellated patterns of beliefs, but these beliefs are often stemming from younger parts of ourselves and behaviors which again come from the past. And so often when we're working with parts, I often relate it to working with children, imagining if you were talking to a child only has the level of awareness or knowledge that they have at that age. And so as our older, wiser selves in our authentic nature, how can we have a compassionate dialogue with these parts to help them realize that we understand that the part is trying to do the best they can with the awareness they have. However, perhaps they need updating in a way, and they need to develop new awareness. So it's through this compassionate dialogue that we have with the parts that we can help them to integrate these new beliefs, new behaviors, and ultimately meet the higher intentions and values and purpose of the part, but in a way that is in more alignment with our authentic nature. So as an example, yeah, we might have a client who has a part which appears to be sabotaging their success. However, that part will believe it is protecting or supporting the person in some way. But counterintuitively, the part is actually sabotaging that person's success. So through this compassionate dialogue, we can work together with the part or the parts. So I think it's important to say as well that often a part will not appear in isolation. A part will appear with a family of parts. We have many parts that show up at the same time. So it's about being able to hold space for all of those parts and find a way for them to work together in alignment and integration with ourselves. Does that answer the question somewhat?
At least somewhat, it does. Jules, thank you. And I appreciate how you've alluded to holding space. And you gestured with your hands like this. And my sense is that of a container holding space for parts, sort of bringing them together and allowing for integration through a compassionate holding and inquiry into what are the needs of the outspoken parts, troubled parts. I sometimes like the metaphor of a big round table and inviting the parts to be by the table all together so everybody can have their fair say and be heard. And sometimes sitting by the fire is a nice analogy too. I'm still wondering. I think you've spoken a little bit to a question that Vitali has raised in the window about our internal work with parts, as in these subpersonalities or aspects of the self within, in relation to working with others, other people in the environment, in the world around us. So what's the relationship between the inner work and the outer worldly work as such?
Yes.
In the conversation of parts.
Okay. So I can't see the chat box right now, just to let you know. So if you could let me know the questions, that's great. So from what I understand from that question is, obviously, if we have parts internally that exist in the shadow or the subconscious and we haven't worked with, we haven't integrated into our psyche. So a part which carries anger is a good example. We often project that onto others or the world around us. So when we can work to integrate the parts within ourselves, within our system, we are then helping to resolve our relationships with others as well. And so we are less likely to project those shadow aspects onto other people. And I believe this is why parts work is so powerful, because it really starts with ourselves. We have to have an integrated psyche or strive towards wholeness within ourselves as much as possible and have that compassionate relationship with our parts before we can have, or before we can fully have that compassionate relationship with others in the outer world as well. So the two go hand in hand, but I strongly believe that the work starts with ourselves. And so often, yeah, if we do have a conflict with parts within our psyche, that conflict is going to manifest externally, and we will see it mirrored back to us in our relationships.
Jules, there's another question relating to that. Jules is saying, if you can give an example of compassionate dialogue, I understand from that, how would it look like? What would you say to yourself, to your parts?
Yeah, absolutely. So a compassionate dialogue would involve, well, I can talk a little bit about a general process I would work through when I'm working with a part. So let's use the example of anxiety. So a part is struggling with some anxiety in relation to a particular context of their life. And so I would ask that client, where in the body is that anxiety located? And, you know, often it's in or around the chest area. So I would ask them to describe more about the sensation. So is there tightness, a heaviness there? Is it a contracting sensation? And then if possible, asking them to give an image or a form to that sensation. So perhaps the shape, the size, the color of it. And then from there, again, this is where the open awareness practice is really important. We want to be in open awareness, and we want our client to be in open awareness. So there is this space and this ability to have the compassion towards this part. And so I would ask my clients, so if this part could speak, what might this part say? What beliefs is this part carrying? What does it believe to be true? What's important to this part? What does this part need? And usually the client will somehow elicit that the part is trying to protect them in some way. And so the compassionate piece is then acknowledging this part and letting the part know we appreciate how it's trying to help us. We can thank the part for being present and having worked so hard to protect us for all of these years. And then negotiating with the part in a compassionate way and asking, So is there a way you can continue to support me or meet these needs in a different way? And so we, from a place of self, in open awareness, we can have this dialogue with the part and perhaps even suggest ways that the part can work with us to continue supporting us in a different way, with behavior that is in alignment with our morals and ethics, and also is not going to be holding us back, but can actually support us in a way moving forward. So that's a general dialogue I might have with a client's part, or help a client to have a dialogue with their part.
Thanks, Jules. I think it's crucial, this point you've made about supporting the client to access that somatic-centered open awareness so that they have an enhanced felt sense of what is alive within them, so that they can therefore tune more accurately into how the part is showing up somatically. But Annalisa has raised another beautiful example, which is also something you said earlier about the manner in which we speak to these parts compassionately. And when identifying that the part has come into existence from an earlier life experience, it's a younger version of ourselves, very typically. So if there's an image, it's often the inner child. And then being an older, wiser experience or expression of the self, a parent perhaps, speaking to the child the way a compassionate parent speaks to their child. And in IFS, as well as in Gabor Mate's work and other methods, this soft, compassionate tone and intentionality of the authentic self, and addressing the needs, as you've just beautifully outlined, is what facilitates the integration. The part then starts to feel more at home within the self. And from my experience, when the authentic self pledges to take care of the part's unmet needs, then that smaller, younger, less mature, less resourceful part of the self doesn't have to act out in ways that we're trying to protect the person or take care of things that they were not really fully equipped to take care of, because that part came into existence when the person was younger and not yet as aware as they might be now. So as the more aware whole self or authentic self, pledging a commitment to the part to take care of the part's needs, the part that no longer has to do what it has been doing, that in turn supports integration. And I hope, in fact, that I'm just echoing something you've said, and that is useful to others. I don't know if you have a follow-up to that, Jules, or if there are any other questions.
Just to add, you prompted me to remember that I think something else that is so powerful about working with parts is the fact that we're not pathologizing our clients, and we're not pathologizing these parts either. So I think it can be such a powerful reframe in itself when we simply let our clients know that this is a part of them. It's not the whole of who they are. So I often hear people saying, I am anxiety, or I am depressed, or I am, even let's say I am a smoker. But when we can help our clients identify this is a part of you that's here for a reason, it gives this space between themselves and the part's behavior, as I said, to reframe it. And also, it's really important to remember that we're not trying to fix or get rid of these parts. We're simply trying to give them space and integrate them. As Jevon, you just said, you know, holding space for them like we would children. And something else I find quite powerful is to help clients know they can continue with this work in between sessions too. It's an ongoing dialogue. We can constantly be speaking to our parts in our psyche. So this idea that perhaps these parts never fully go away, but we can find a way to have a healthy relationship with them, and Jevon, as you just said, for the parts to meet their needs in a different way.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jules, and for pointing to the value of a practice. And I might add, a practice that enables you to build a relationship with what for you is the authentic self. And I alluded to in the beginning, in the introduction of today's session, you know, the authentic self can mean many things to different types of people, depending on where you are in the world and what you believe. But if we consider the authentic self to be the whole self that is not a part of the self, it is the sum of all the parts, but it is also not limited to that. It is our connection to our sources of aliveness, to each other, to everything in nature. And a practice dedicated to establishing that quality of awareness and embodying it, so that when parts do pop up, as they invariably do when they get triggered in day-to-day life, then we have that capacity and that spaciousness to bring to the part, first of all, to identify it, to be able to communicate to it with compassion. And this brings us to a question by Olga. What would you say is self-energy, as it is referred to in internal family systems? And what we're talking about here is the authentic self in open awareness and in transpersonal coaching. Are we talking about the same thing?
Yes. So I believe we are talking about the same thing. It's synonymous with, so the authentic self that we talk about here is synonymous with self-energy that is spoken about in internal family systems. So yes, it's our authentic self. It's what exists behind the ego. It's a state of being. It encompasses the entire conscious and unconscious realms. So Carl Jung defines the self as the entire psyche that includes consciousness, unconsciousness, the collective unconscious. And perhaps that is a slight differentiation in that, from my experience in internal family systems, Richard Schwartz tends to shy away from talking about the transpersonal dimension or the collective unconscious. I'm not saying he doesn't acknowledge that, he does, but he tends to shy away from it. Whereas in our approach, we do talk explicitly about connecting with the collective unconscious in a state of open awareness. So yeah, it is the entire psyche that exists behind or beyond the ego. So actually, an analogy I really like to use, and I think it's been brought up in previous webinars, but this idea that we are the blue sky, that the self is the blue sky, and the clouds are the contents of the ego or the parts which are passing through or existing there, and we can be the blue sky that exists behind all of that.
I love that metaphor too, Jules. Thank you. And just picking up on collective unconscious and working in a collective group way, Vitali's question, working with groups and the existence of parts in group dynamics. What does working with a group and considering parts look like? I might have my own response to that, Jules, if you don't have a ready response. But
yeah, Jevon, do you want to go first? Because I'm just processing the question. So perhaps you'd like to
more
speak
directly. Are they commonly disintegrated parts which generally are suppressed in our society, adds Vitali? Well, that second part of your question, I think so. I think we have on a larger societal scale, a collective consensus, a collective belief system, a paradigm that we might, as a religious group or as a population, have subscribed to. That becomes our collective lens through which we view ourselves, our system, and everything in life because of that. Again, it's the practice of open awareness that helps us, first of all, on an individual level, to be able to see that that phenomenology is occurring, that we are caught up in a paradigm. A fish doesn't even know it's in water because it's born and lives and dies, if it lives a full life below the surface, in the substance of water. And so we live and grow and commune with others in a particular paradigm. It is a practice such as open awareness, or any practice that enables one to have an open aperture of awareness, that first of all enables us to identify what's the bigger picture that we might have not been receptive to before, and what are the dynamics at play there. And within those dynamics, what is being activated within me, those are my personal parts in relation to the collective. In a group coaching situation then, with that all being considered, the coach or facilitator would want to help that group to establish what their unconscious biases are, what their consensus reality is, and then that becomes part of the conscious awareness that informs the process. And then within that, what parts are being triggered, in which particular contexts, that gives us something more specific to focus particular coaching sessions on. And then we can go session by session to establish more awareness and to work collectively as a group. A group in open awareness is able to co-create a field of energy and creativity and awareness that would not occur to any individual within that particular group by themselves. So there's something very powerful about group work that thinks and utilizes approaches such as this, because they're able to transcend their normal way of thinking and perceiving that they do in a group context, but also individually. So that's why I love group work, because groups in that participatory space create magic together that they would otherwise not do if there wasn't that level of awareness. Okay, so I have tried to answer Vitali's question. Jules, I don't know if you have a follow-up to that, or Vitali, if you have a follow-up.
No, just to add, I agree with what you're saying, Jevon, and I'm working in a mindfulness retreat center at the moment, and I notice this a lot in the group dynamic. There's something that emerges in the collective field, and often, yes, as I mentioned earlier, what individuals are working with on a personal level. Again, let's take the example of anger. This tends to show up in the collective field as well, in the relational dynamics. So I think it's similar to what I said earlier, that when we're working in a group as well, there will be these common themes that emerge in the collective field, and it is possible to work with those on both an individual and collective level.
Thank you. So Pina has a question. How can we switch from speaking to the client, from speaking to the specific part? How would you invite that dialogue, Pina, if I'm understanding your question correctly?
Yeah, so, for the client themselves to speak directly to their part, as I mentioned, it's important for them to be in open awareness. And the biggest importance here is that they have space to work with the part. So we don't necessarily have to ask the part to separate or dissociate from us, from the body, but as long as there is space for us to be able to work with this part, and that is possible when we're in open awareness. And then it's the same for ourselves as coaches or facilitators. When we're in open awareness, we have this compassion, this empathy, this ability to hold space and dialogue with the part. So often, whatever image the client elicits in regards to this part, we'll work with that image, and we can imagine it, yeah, being in or around the body or slightly away from the body. But like I said, it's about creating space rather than dissociating from, or the part dissociating from the body. So hopefully that answers the question.
There's a small question from Kate, which is, how do we identify all our parts?
Wow, yeah, that's a big question. And I'm laughing because what I've come to realize is that we have an infinite number of parts, in a sense. There's an infinite number of possibilities when it comes to how many parts we can have. So, you know, in terms of working with a client, it's important to work with whatever is present in the here and now. So whatever is showing up is what needs attending to at that time. And like I said, often, yeah, parts don't come in isolation, they come in couples or groups. So I always say, if you're working with a part and there is any kind of resistance to being able to connect or have a dialogue with that part, that resistance is normally another part that has come in. So then to work with that part instead. So you can keep going until you get to a point of there being no resistance, and there is this open, compassionate communication with the part, and then that's the part you will work with in that session. So to answer the question, ongoing work to get to know all of your parts.
Hence the reason we should have a practice that serves that purpose of expanding awareness, and I might add, just staying curious.
Yes.
So, you know, what's become activated in me, and is it a part? And invariably you'll discover that it is at least a particular part that is most prominent at any given moment. And arguably anything that occurs within us, whether positive or negative, I think IFS makes this point, is the domain of a part. So if you treat everything as a part, then it's almost as if, well, we want to be careful then, because that's fragmenting. I'm all of these parts, but actually you're bringing conscious awareness to an existing phenomenon. And if there isn't as much conscious awareness there, then the parts keep on doing what they're doing at the unconscious level. And then we live life more as a knee-jerk reaction, unconsciously, and less able to bring our full selves to any given situation. And our full selves, or the authentic self, is, you know, those 8 C words. And with that comes a great degree of resourcefulness. So I think this type of practice and orientation leads to being a more fully functional human being in the world today. And I can't see an issue with that. So there are many great questions still to come in the chat window, but Henny's got his hand up. So you go next, Henny, please.
Thank you. It's easier to talk than to type. But I'm also looking at, for example, Rafat's thought in the chat window. It makes me think about what we mean when we talk about the authentic self. We've used that word a number of times this morning. But I have an hypothesis that any conscious process, whether it be a thought or what we say, or any conscious process, is expressed by a part. It's almost impossible for us to express something that is not being expressed by one of our parts. Here's an example, you know, so I'm working with a client and we've identified an unresourceful part. And I asked the client, so what would you like to say to that part? And the client says, oh, I would like to say to that part to pull up her socks, to get with it, to be better. You know, what's wrong with you? And I said to her, well, wow, okay, but what voice, whose voice have you just used to say that to the part? And she says, oh, with a shock, it's my mother's voice. It's my strict mother's voice. And I said to her, wow, so one part was talking to the other part. So what really is the authentic self? I'm not sure if we can experience the authentic self and all our parts find their life out of the authentic self. But whenever we express anything, we are doing it through a part or a constellation of parts. So I think that's what Jung meant by complexes. It's when parts sort of gang up on other parts. They come together and form a group. And so we need to be sensitive to that and explore all parts. Yes, there is the authentic self, but I don't think the authentic self has a voice on its own. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, Henny. And it reminds me of what I was just saying in terms of if there's any kind of resistance coming in, or if the voice is not a compassionate voice, then I agree that is another part which is speaking. However, I do believe that we are able to get to a place where we are speaking from, let's say, a place of self or a place of wisdom and compassion and empathy. It's coming from this, more of the inner authentic self, where we are speaking, let's say from a more transpersonal domain. And that's what Richard Schwartz refers to as self-energy. We need to be in self-energy, and I believe we need to be in open awareness to really work compassionately with these parts.
Along those lines, Jules, how might we differentiate between being in a more wise, more resourceful part? Let's say, I know that when I'm doing coaching work, I'm wearing the coaching hat and I'm identified with my coach part. And I can sometimes do a marvelous job at being a coach. How would I know that it's the coaching part that I'm identified with that's holding space for the client and doing what it does versus what might be understood as the authentic self? How do I differentiate between clever parts, wise guy parts, and the authentic self?
Yeah. So, when we're connecting with our wiser parts or higher self, or parts with the coaching hat on, however you want to define these parts, often we can actually, this is where we can draw on even external parts or archetypal energies. So I often, with my clients, let's say they're struggling to connect with self energy or struggling to be in open awareness and find this resource within themselves, I will ask them to imagine or connect with a compassionate figure or guide that they relate to. It could be someone they know in their life, or it could be a spiritual figure that's passed away. So to connect with that archetypal energy and use that as a resource. And so that's coming more from an external place, whereas the authentic self or self energy, I experience it as an embodied felt sense of being more expansive, having feeling lighter, feeling grounded, having an anchor within myself. It's something I experience through the felt sense in the body. So that is how I would differentiate the two. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, that resonates with me, of course, Jules. Yeah, I believe our way to more transcendent perspectives, more transcendent experiences is through the body. I've been interested in other ways, and have tried many other ways. And at this current stage, for me anyway, it's all about the somatic experience, because it's through the sensation of emotion and energy, and then the thoughts and then the behaviors that one is compelled to engage in or not, that we're able to connect more fully with who we truly are and with the world around us. And so the somatic experience for me is very important, and that's why an embodiment practice is crucial for people that are doing this work, and for those whom we're working with to integrate their parts that were identified in sessions. Embodiment is about integration and healing, returning to wholeness, and that journey of healing. The return to wholeness is one of identifying parts and allowing them to be at home once again within the self. That's my position at this point in time. Meanwhile, there are many great questions coming through at this stage. I don't know if I'm picking up on all of them. We've reached the hour, and we can allow for some more time. And I'm wondering if at this point, anybody would like to speak as opposed to just chatting, putting a text chat message. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask Jules directly? There is also Henny and myself in the space. We're glad to speak. Annalisa, good to see you.
Hi.
Hi there.
I don't have a question. I was thinking about the parts discussion and the authentic self. And I know in our training, I've already asked Jevon, or the group actually, to tell me what was the difference between open awareness and the right hemisphere as described by Ian McGilchrist in his hemispheric hypothesis. And the reason I find his metaphor so compelling is that essentially there is a recognition that there are two souls in each of us, or two consciousnesses, if there is a plural for that word, I'm not sure. So one is the left hemisphere, and that's the voice that we hear. It's the verbal narrative that we hear in the brain when we talk to ourselves, or when that woman heard her mother's words telling her to pull up her socks. The other consciousness is the right hemisphere, and it doesn't have speech. So it communicates to us through what we think are subconscious behaviors or subconscious or even unconscious messages, such as dreams, the body, emotions. And so the way I see this conversation that's happening, or this theory of the parts versus the authentic self, I translate it into the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere trying to communicate with each other when they have different objectives or different values or different aims. And that happens probably in all of us, probably because of also societal and cultural suppressions that we have already mentioned before. So so my point, I guess, is that perhaps there isn't such a thing as a unified self or unified authentic self. What we need to align are these two separate entities or minds in order to integrate them, and only then we can live authentically and as a whole person, rather than showing up with different persons in different contexts.
Thank you, Annalisa. Jules, I don't know if you have a response, but before it slips out of my conscious awareness from the left hemisphere into the right, I'd like my left and right hemispheres to collaborate in responding to you. And it helps to do that swiftly. And I think another thing that helps is to maintain open awareness. I sense open awareness utilizing this metaphor as the space that connects the left and right hemispheres, and at the same time is the space around both hemispheres. And perhaps those hemispheres are complexes, as Rafat is referring to them. Maybe there's something else. But open awareness then serves as a mediator. There's an aliveness, an energy that is transferred between the non-verbal into the verbal. It serves as a bridge and enables me to have a more direct access to what would otherwise remain unconscious, and to give expression through words or other ways to that which was unconscious and is now becoming conscious to me. And I believe that in so doing, as a more conscious individual, those that I interact with, I can communicate with more consciously. And Vitaly had an earlier follow-up question to working with groups. It's about creating more consciousness in the individuals and between the individuals in a group setting, for which our open awareness integral process, to answer your question, Vitaly, serves really well. But that was my quick response, Annalisa, to this idea. So it's tempting to think McGilchrist is talking about open awareness when he's talking about the right hemisphere. But actually, if I think about it a bit further, I think open awareness is the union of left and right.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I have a part which is has all sorts of questions and thoughts going through my mind right now. But in response to what you've just shared, and also to what Henny said earlier, you know, often we can work with a part, or a client's part, or a client can work with their part in a space of open awareness without even needing to give a voice or a dialogue to it. So, you know, I've noticed something really powerful can happen to a client's part simply by holding space for it and noticing how the sensation or the image of that part evolves in the body. So tracking the sensation or tracking the image. So actually a part can transform its energy without us even needing to have a dialogue with it sometimes. And so, yeah, that could be something interesting to explore with your clients, just noticing how we can stay simply with the sensation in the body and track that as a part rather than needing to even give a voice to it.
David has put a few questions in the chat window, and with consideration to parts being passed on to us through generations. And if we think about intergenerational trauma, intergenerational genetic coding, which is being spoken about a lot these days, to what extent may parts that are present in my life be parts that have not necessarily come about through traumatic experiences in this lifetime, or adverse child experiences even, but parts that have been passed on to me genetically by generations in the family before. And I might add a question to that, Jules, if I could just put this to you. What would our role be as transpersonal coaches or ASE facilitators if there is a suspicion, or if we identify parts that have been handed over to us through epigenetics, so, whatever we might think of that as?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is very possible that we have parts which are carrying intergenerational trauma, or even carrying collective trauma. You know, I'm again interested in that when it comes to highly sensitive people, we have a tendency to have parts which are carrying collective trauma. But yeah, definitely intergenerational trauma or experiences. So my perspective is that we work with those parts in exactly the same way. We don't always need to know the story. We don't always need to know the origin. We don't need to unpack that. You know, often clients want to understand. We have parts which need to know, need to understand, need to make sense of, but I would say that's not necessary in terms of our healing or the client's healing. It's completely possible to work with whatever that experience or trauma or emotion is without needing to know the origin of it. So yes, it is possible, and we all do carry parts that carry intergenerational trauma, like I said, but we don't always need to know where that comes from. Jevon, I don't know if you agree or have anything to add to that.
I do. I can see Henny's hand up, but just to add quickly, also in light of Christine's question, does it matter what the source of the part is? Surely what is most important is working with it. Christine, I'm not too sure if you're talking about the source as in working with it from its past roots and the narrative. I tend to agree wholeheartedly with what Jules has just said. Working with the somatic manifestation in the present is the most important thing. And especially if you're wearing that coaching hat, if you're not doing psychotherapy, you're working firmly in the here and now. Therefore, the best information we've got, and even many psychotherapists would agree, is what is present in the body and somatic field here and now, as opposed to going into the story of there and then, what happened, and that more old-fashioned, dare I say, way of doing therapy, which is revisiting the past memory again and again, but rather what is more appropriate for us as coaches in any case, working with what is present, what is the current energy, how's it showing up, how are you feeling that, what images come to mind, and even if the imagery is a memory of a past event, we stay present in the body with an overview. This is a characteristic of the ASE method, that we can, at the same time as being very present with the felt sense, zoom out to have that bird's eye view perspective of how the current situation is manifesting in our life, the pattern that has led to it, and the origin of that pattern. And at the beginning of that origin, there and then, there may be an event. And that might even be a traumatic event. But the client does not associate into the trauma of the memory when we're doing this kind of work. They simply become aware of it and stay present with the coach or facilitator's guidance in the body with that overview perspective. With the overview perspective, there's a degree of objectivity. They see the bigger picture. They get the cognitive insight. By tuning that back into the body, they embody that insight and they feel more viscerally, kinesthetically, what is shifting within them. And it is that embodied change that makes all the difference in my experience. Henny, you've had your hand up for a while. Let's move to you.
Well, it links to what you're saying. It's a different type of question, if I may. Do all parts have a somatic expression? Here's an example. You're working with a client that is very, very heady, very analytical. That's the model of the world. It's the part that is dominant. And that might be causing them problems. And then you might invite them to say, well, you know, how do you feel that in your body? But as soon as they start doing that, they lose that part. And so that part can't express itself because that part is by nature disassociated and disembodied. And so, yes, I think somatic expression is important, but it's not all we are, is it? So do all parts have a corresponding somatic expression that we have to try and define before we can work with it? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. I've recognized that, as you're saying, Henny, a lot of clients have parts which actually cause them to dissociate. So if a client is struggling to connect with the body and the somatic sensations. Normally, from my experience, the client will identify that part as, let's say, brain fog or a dark cloud around the head, or as feeling dizzy. And so my experience is that the part does have a quality, a sensation to it, but it might be around the body as opposed to directly in the body. So as I said, brain fog, a cloud is a common one, feeling dizzy, or a haziness around the face where they can't see properly. So it's as if that part or the energy is just located somewhere around the body, and that's the dissociation, but that is a part. So yeah, I'd be curious if anybody else has anything to add to that, Henny or Jevon.
I might add that these very heady or cerebral clients who we might say are stuck in the head for, I think, the reasons Jules is pointing to. And I have found that a very fruitful session for such clients is for them to open awareness and for the facilitator to offer them a few pointers to at least become a degree more somatically oriented, to wrap themselves in awareness, to feel into the entire volume of space that their whole body occupies. And in so doing, to start to tune into the inner workings of what is occurring for them. I think as soon as these more heady type people are able to become at least somewhat more embodied in their general orientation, they find a level of creativity and resourcefulness that wasn't yet apparent to them. That doesn't mean we can't do good work thinking things through in that what might in the old-fashioned way of thinking about the left brain be, more cognitive, more rational, and so on. I think a lot of ground can be covered. But until we tap into the intelligence of the cells of the body, there's an important piece missing. I think if I consider some of the clients I've had that were more heady, as soon as they did successfully tap into the body through somatic open awareness practice, that's when we started to make really good progress. That's when they were getting the results that they came for. So that's my position there.
Just to add a bit to that, I mean, all of this makes sense to me, but it's the balance rather than the trying to get rid of. So for that heady client, when you offer them some means of associating into the body, of having an embodied experience, you are activating parts that they haven't used often because they've lost that perspective, they've lost that balance, they've lost that frame of I'm an entire being with a mind and a body. And so you're not sort of replacing that heady part with a body part. You're just giving them an experience of a part that has perhaps been in their shadow that they've neglected. And that gives you the opportunity of saying, how does it feel different? If you were to play a game and you were to shift your awareness from this body to what you were talking about earlier about your thinking part, and you would use obviously your client's words, how does it feel different? And once they start cultivating that skill of jumping between those parts, the disembodied part and the embodied part, well, I don't think there's an issue anymore, is it? The issue will probably no longer be there.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I agree with everything that's been said. And also, for those clients who've experienced a lot of trauma or challenges in life, who find it difficult to be in the body, then I would say it is really important, again, to work with the part which, let's say it is fog around the brain, which is trying to protect them or stop them from being deeply connected with the body, because that part is there for a reason. So we can't, we don't want to fight against that. We want to work with it. And when we work with it, then we can help the client to come into more of an embodied space.
Amen to that. I think this is a very crucial point for us as transpersonal practitioners and ASE facilitators. And Pina is emphasizing that we need to have another Zoom session on this in a confidential space in which we can work experientially. I fully agree. And how can we as coaches go into unburdening our parts? So perhaps I'll pass that question over to Jules. How do we as coaches do the work on ourselves, and what support is in place for us? And also to add that in a month's time, our next fireside conversation will be on working with trauma in coaching. So we won't move very far from this conversation. There is another Zoom session coming up, Pina and others, in a month's time for this group. So we'll deepen the conversation there. But Jules, what should we or can we as practitioners do to unburden the parts? That's IFS language that Pina is using.
Yeah, so I agree. It's really important for us as coaches and facilitators to work with our parts and be aware that we do have parts. So this is where supervision comes in, or for us to be engaging with our own, or have our own coaching or therapy. I think it's really important, and especially in sessions with clients, we will have parts that come up. We might have a part that feels this urgency to fix our clients, or a part that feels worried if our client isn't making the progress that we feel they should be making. We might have a part that is resistant to something a client has shared with us. So it's really important for us to be in open awareness and start to notice these parts coming up in our sessions with clients. And so noticing them in the body, and, to begin with, simply notice those parts are there. Be curious as to why they are there. Perhaps ask that part to take a step to the side for the purpose of staying present with the client in the session. And then you can take that part to supervision, or you can take that part to your own coaching or therapy session and work with it there. But I will say it's normal. It's normal that we will have parts showing up in relationship to our clients. And so just to acknowledge and not judge that, because we are humans as well.
I'll take this opportunity to thank Jules for being our inspiring conversation partner today. It's been wonderful, Jules, to hear from you on this tantalizing subject. Thank you all for your fantastic questions. It's been a great session. Thank you, Jules. Thank you all.